This is the first in a series of seminars that the Private Sector Commission will be staging here in Guyana as part of its efforts to prepare the Guyanese business community for the oil and gas industry, and of course to highlight the opportunities which exist in the industry. I told a gathering recently, a few months ago, that on my way there, I was speaking with someone who said that in Guyana, the question now when exploration activities is going on is not whether there will be a discovery, but how large the next discovery would be. So far here in Guyana, we've had 7 discoveries. I believe that comes from 7 out of 8 fields. ExxonMobil would have drilled about 10 to 11 wells. And the number of discoveries, when you look at the number of attempts, I am told is unprecedented. I was looking at a televised program yesterday morning coming from Trinidad and Tobago. A former official of that country's government was speaking, and the level of excitement that you could have gotten from that conversation, not only from him, but the person interviewing him, was amazing. And I believe that similarly here in Guyana, there is a marked increase in expectation and anticipation. The Private Sector Commission and the groups that fall under this umbrella body, such as the GCCI and GMSA, I believe play an integral role in the industry, not only from a business standpoint, but also as well as a national development standpoint. PSC would have spearheaded a conference last year, the latter part of last year, which was the first of its kind, and that was able to bring together a number of stakeholders, including government and opposition, which is not something very easy to do. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Mr. Norman McLean, who will give some welcoming remarks. Thank you.
On the issue of oil and gas, which we have launched, it seems that unlike the old saying that we have about flogging a dead horse, we are in flogging a galloping horse, and which is really galloping. Every week or thereabouts, there's a new find. And I suspect that Exxon knew this all the time. So it's just a matter of handing it out at the right time. So I see Mr. Christopher Ram looking at me very seriously. They have a saying, you know, you have to keep your enemies close to you. So we have Chris close to us. So we are on a galloping horse. We are being richly blessed, and some say cursed, by these outstanding discoveries. Sometimes we feel we really don't know what we want. As is sometimes said, when we look at oil-producing countries, for example, Libya, Nigeria, Venezuela, even Trinidad and Tobago, the saying is, as the Trinidadians themselves said, we have oil and it can't spoil. I think Mr. Eric Williams, former Prime Minister, was one who made that comment. We now have got one of the largest reservoirs of oil and gas, and we could find ourselves like other countries where the country is rich, but the people are poor. And so we have to look critically at that. There was a time in Guyana when we said, goat must bite we. I don't know, the foreigners here will not understand what that means. As Guyanese, we know what goat mouth means, that when the goat bites a plant, it doesn't grow. So that at one stage we felt that we had goat mouth. So we are surrounded by rich countries in oil, and we wondered why it is that Guyana didn't have it. So now we have it. And on that score, I want to look at practical and mythical issues. On the practical side, because we did not have oil, our economy still grew by 3 to 5% GDP. And that was because Guyana had the opportunity to develop its other resources to its optimum: gold, bauxite, timber, sugar, And we were being considered as the food basket of the Caribbean. As we said, we can't eat oil, but we can feed the Caribbean. And so this was what we were using instead of having oil. And my hope is that we will continue along that trend and continue to be the food basket of the Caribbean and produce as we used to produce, and oil will add on to whatever we are doing, and not that we become so obsessed with oil that we embrace what is called the Dutch disease. So that's the practical side. On the mythical side, our myth was that our oil offshore was in a lower basin, and if we ever developed our oil industry, we would drain all the oil from Venezuela, Trinidad, and Suriname, and all will come to Guyana. That was the mythical part. Now we have the discoveries, world-class oil discoveries, starting with Liza. And I saw, I think in today's paper, that we're actually going to be drilling for the oil itself now, followed by Piara, Liza Deep, Snook, Turbo, Ranger, and Pecora 1, and I suspect that more will come. I have a feeling that is the case. The overall discovery, I understand, is in the order of 3.2 to 4 million barrels of recoverable oil, and this is a bonanza for Guyana. And rather than share the bonanza, what we are seeing is that we seem to be haggling over spoils, and we have to be careful where that is concerned. I am seeing daily attacks. This is one such attack. Every day's paper, we have a comparison between Ghana and Guyana. And yesterday, I saw Uganda has come into the loop. And if it's not 10%, it's 12.5%. And there we now have a situation where, oh my God, Guyana only getting 2. So we have to be careful how we haggle on these issues. As I saw it in one of the papers, we have been ranked either number 7 or number 8 on world inventories of oil. We are now rich in oil, but what about our people? This daily comparison is practical, but not really a good thing in my view. But we have to embrace it. We are at a stage where we had our exploration phase agreement. Now our petroleum agreement, which was signed, I think, on 7th of October 2016 between the Honorable Minister, ESO, Exploration, HES, and CNOOC, Nexon. So it is a development that is just over a year old. It is sometimes unbelievable that we could not negotiate better terms, as we had several models from which we could have copied. Today, through the initiatives of the Private Sector Commission, in cooperation with the Guyana Manufacturing Association, Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and other core members of the Private Sector Commission, we have brought in, as I said, a CESO executive, Mr. Tirmandi, who has experience in oil and gas, to examine perspectives for local private sector and share those with us. We would like to look at some of the issues which will confront us. And the reason that we have this gathering here today is because of the great interest being shown by Guyanese into what is taking place. And we want to look today at issues of taxation and royalty, employment and training, social responsibility and protection of the environment, stability agreement, signature bonus, and local content in particular. I think we are very concerned about that. Most of the issues may all be tied to stability of the agreements. And I want to share with you some experience which I have had at the Omai agreement. Everybody knows about the Omai mine, which was the first major mine in Guyana, and we had our mineral agreement. And in conducting, after the elections in 1992, when the PPC won the election, the call came out that they wanted that it was a sweetheart deal, 5% royalty. We were giving away our patrimony and what have you. We were giving away the whole of Guyana because of this agreement which was signed by the PNC at that time and now taken over by the PPC. And if we look at what we have in the present agreement, we are saying it's a 2% royalty, as stated at Article 15.6, and it could be less. Amazingly, the Sunday's newspaper we read talk about 12.5%. The government of the day at that time decided to have 4 different investigations done of the mineral agreement with OMI, and I'm only sharing this to let you know that really I don't want to use the word pissing in the wind, but that is really what it is going to amount to. The UN transnational cooperation was brought in to look into that agreement because they felt that the 5% was a waste. We were giving away our country. And that an agreement, as we saw it at OMI, was a binding agreement between the government and OMI Gold Mines. It was not a binding agreement between the PPP or the PNC. It was the government of the day that signed, and whether you liked it or not, this was it. So the UN Transnational Cooperation came, and after their investigation, the government at the time, the PPC, were not happy with what was said. So they created their own mineral agreement committee, led by a gentleman by the name of Mr. Rambo Gaskin, with, I don't know if he's any relation, sir? But we had the Commissioner of Inland Revenue, Mr. Edgar Heligo, and others there, and they couldn't find anything really wrong with it, and so they brought in a company called Certec, a financial company out of Canada, to look into that agreement. There too, they could not find anything, and finally, they commissioned PricewaterhouseCoopers, and it's very important that we use them because they're here looking at helping us with sugar. And they delivered what I call a watershed presentation, which established the standard conditions for gold mining at that time. In the case of Guyana, Australia was the only country with a better deal than the Guyanese model, as established by PricewaterhouseCoopers. And that delivered comparative analyses showing what was the rate. And this morning I was talking with Chairmandi, and I was asking, how is it possible that Uganda could get 12.5%? He says that is probably because they don't produce any oil of any significance, so you can call what the hell you like because it doesn't matter. And that's what we found. In some countries, that big royalties, 20% and what have you, but they didn't produce any gold. So this is one of the issues we have to look at. We, however, recognize that once that stability clause is properly signed, it is nearly sacrosanct. And unless Exxon itself or ESSO exercises its social conscience to modify or change, it is unlikely that we will have any such change. Are we in a similar position in oil and gas? The jury seems to be out of it at this point in time, and the question we are asking is what is fair and reasonable. There are agreements which state that with the size of discoveries, Guyana could renegotiate the oil deal. I saw that in a big front page paper, of the paper. That is debatable and will forever have us arguing on who is greedy and what is fair. It could be what we call, for us as older people, the dog and the bone. I don't know if you remember that as a youngster. The dog walking across and seeing in the pond a reflection of the bone that he has. And the bone in the water looked a lot bigger, so he let it go to get for the bigger one and lost all. So I just thought I'd make that parable about the dog and the bone. On that note, I hope that this will stimulate a discussion on what is good and fair for Guyanese, and whether we can reopen the negotiation, challenge the present terms, and get their agreement in good conscience. That is what is required at this stage. And with that note, I want to thank you very much and to welcome you all to this seminar.
Minister Gaskin has urgent matters of state to attend to, so he will be speaking now, and after which the program will continue as outlined. Minister Gaskin.
Very good morning to you all. I'd first of all like to commend the chairman of the Private Sector Commission, not only for hosting this seminar, but also for his strong stance taken last month against the placement of an anti-go invest advertisement in a few of our daily newspapers. I was not in the country at the time, but I was very proud of the way in which the chairman and a number of other persons, including Mr. Christopher Ram, responded to that negative advertisement. Guyana belongs to all of us, and I think we need to behave responsibly towards our country. So when people deliberately take actions that are designed to cause harm to our country, whether economically or otherwise, I believe it is entirely appropriate and necessary that their behavior is condemned across the board, and I'm satisfied that this is what happened in that case. Most countries around the world are lining up to bring foreign investments into their economies. They're spending millions of dollars each year to promote their economies to global investors. Here in Guyana, we have been thrown into the spotlight, and there's suddenly a huge interest in our country by a number of major international companies. And instead of being excited about this and trying to get prepared for the opportunities that it could create, as how we're doing today, some of us are shouting and screaming every single day from the front pages of our newspapers about what a terrible thing this is and how we're getting ripped off and we're being tied up like iguanas and all sorts of foolishness, including incomplete comparisons with royalties that other countries are getting. This is a new industry for Guyana, and it's one in which we don't have any real expertise or any real experience or even suitable training programs to help us to build the capacity that we lack. It is an industry which requires high levels of upfront investment, well beyond what can be raised either from local sources or by local companies. Returns on that investment are affected by price fluctuations, and this increases the risk to the investor. The question for us as Guyanese is, do we or do we not want an oil and gas industry in Guyana? The vast majority of Guyanese people that I have spoken to would like to see Guyana producing oil. And they would like this to happen because they feel that somehow the Guyanese people will benefit if oil is produced in Guyana. And they're absolutely right. After all, it is our oil. Why shouldn't we benefit from it? I believe Guyanese people also understand that just having oil sitting 3 kilometers below sea level does not necessarily provide any benefits to us as a people, other than the comfort of ownership. And that if we want to benefit from the oil, then we have to extract it. But we also need to be realistic. And like I said, we don't have the ability to extract this oil, so we need someone else to extract it for us. And there are not too many companies in the world that can do deep water oil exploration and production. It also involves a long-term relationship or partnership that is guided by an agreed-upon contract, proper legislation and regulations, and a fair amount of goodwill. Now, as far as the contract is concerned, the fact that a handful of people have been repeating on a daily basis that this contract is bad for Guyana and that we're getting chicken feed does not make their statements true. The government of Guyana will receive, in the first year of oil production, 2% of the gross proceeds, as well as 50% of profit oil. Based on production of 100,000 barrels per day, and at today's gold price of approximately $60 per barrel, this amounts to in excess of $300 million in government revenues in the first year. I don't think that's chicken feed. Additionally, government will receive withholding taxes from subcontractors, overseas-based subcontractors. And in fact, this has already begun. And I'm glad the Major General retired mentioned the OMI contract, because I'd like to compare what's happening in the oil and gas industry with what prevails in the gold industry. And I'm not knocking gold in any way. I like gold. But gold is Guyana's biggest export earner by far, and Guyana has been exporting gold for about 150 years. The last 8 years have been the best years for gold production in Guyana ever, both in terms of the amount of gold produced and also of the value of gold produced and exported, and also the value of government revenues collected from gold. Yet the government has collected just over $300 million in royalties and taxes from all the gold produced in Guyana over the last 8 years. In the first year of oil production, the government of Guyana will earn about the same that it has earned from the last 8 years of gold production. I don't think that that is chicken feed. And the gold produced over the last 8 years, from which the government would have earned this $300 million in revenues, is valued at approximately $5 billion. For a similar value of oil under this so-called chicken feed contract, our government, or any government in Guyana, would have received approximately $700 million in revenues. And I have not heard anyone complain about government's share of gold revenues. And our gold is just as valuable as our oil. It's a natural resource. It's a non-renewable natural resource, which we all value and which we all own. By 2022, when the second phase of development starts to produce oil, government revenues will increase to approximately $800 million per year. So for anyone to assert that government is selling out or giving away our oil is just plain nonsense. Could we have gotten more? You can always get more. You can always get less. But the fact remains that you just can't start off with no industry and no proven reserves and want to play hardball with investors who have years of experiences in the field and who can take their investment somewhere else without suffering any major consequences. And I'm spending some time on this particular matter, not because I'm trying to tell you that it's the best contract in the world. Sure, there is room for improvement, a lot of room for improvement. But I believe that you need to know that there is nothing ridiculous or lopsided about the contract. Because if you buy into that sort of propaganda and become distracted by the negativity, then you are not likely to prepare yourselves for the transformation that oil production can bring to Guyana. I personally believe that this is a decent deal, and I am not just saying so as a government minister, but as a proud Guyanese citizen. I cannot stand here and try to sell you something that I myself don't believe in. I would not do that. And my views transcend politics. And this is why I don't blame the previous government for the terms and conditions of the contract that they negotiated. In the context of an offshore basin that had not yet been de-risked, it may not have been prudent for them to demand more at the time. Who knows where we might have been today had we not signed that contract back in 1999. And just for clarity, the agreement that we're all talking about is an agreement signed in 1999 and one which both parties agreed to modify in 2016. It's not a new agreement. There was no formal negotiation process. The company had a valid agreement with the government of Guyana, which was not up for renegotiation. So there was no obligation on the part of the company to enter into any negotiations with the government. And you don't unilaterally amend the contract after the other party has invested hundreds of millions of dollars under the terms and conditions of that contract. Governments have to behave responsibly when it comes to business dealings, especially if we want to do more business in the same industry. But having said that, I also believe that we are now in a much stronger position to negotiate the remaining blocks based on Guyana's national priorities. The interest is there, and many of the world's leading international petroleum exploration companies want a piece of the action. And when it comes to allocating the remaining blocks, government will be hiring a firm with international expertise to guide that process. Because we now have options. There's demand for our petroleum blocks. The paradigm has changed. We have proven oil resources. And contrary to what is being suggested in the media, government ministers do not negotiate oil production agreements or licenses. And just for clarity also, I have nothing against persons criticizing our government. I believe politicians are fair game. You throw your hat in the ring and you take whatever criticisms come your way. There's nothing wrong with that. But there seems to be a concerted effort to derail the progress of an industry that can bring about much needed transformation of our country and of our economy. And the information being shared with the public is incomplete and it is misleading. Those who are comparing Guyana's 2% royalty to Ghana's 10% royalty know very well that they are looking at two different types of agreement, and they are not painting the complete picture. I have no problem with us looking at agreements signed by other countries and us learning from those agreements. But let's look at the whole picture and not just the parts that show us getting less than them. So I'd like to draw your attention to the following details of the contract between ExxonMobil and the government of Ghana. And this is information that is in the public domain. First of all, this is a new contract for ExxonMobil to begin exploration of an offshore block in Ghana. The contract was signed in January of this year and comes on the heels of last September's ruling by the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea in favor of Ghana in its dispute with its neighbor, the Ivory Coast. Please bear in mind that Guyana's case with Venezuela has only just been referred to the International Court of Justice, and that these are important considerations when entering into a long-term, large-scale investment agreement. Guyana has a royalty and production sharing type of agreement, while Ghana has a royalty and taxation model. Guyana receives 2% royalty and 50% of profit oil, while Ghana receives 10% royalty and 35% corporation tax on its profits. Prior to this agreement, it is worth noting that the other oil companies had been paying a 5% royalty in Ghana. Ghana also has petroleum exploration and production legislation that gives government a 10 to 15% stake in oil production companies, subject to payment of their share of operating expenses. Our Petroleum Act has no such provision. In the case of the recently signed ExxonMobil contract, the Ghanaian government has a 15% stake and has to foot the share of operating costs, but no exploration or development costs. The company also enjoys the same import tax waiver in Ghana as it does in Guyana. It also has no VAT liability in Ghana. Ghana did not receive a signature bonus. The Ghanaian contract also has stability provisions. The company will recover its cost over a 10-year period. And finally, Ghana also has local content legislation requiring at least 5% of equity to be held by a local company. In Guyana, we don't have local content legislation as yet. And what's important is, I'm sure we all expect that the terms and conditions of that agreement will be honored by that country if or when the company discovers oil and decides to apply for a production license. I don't think that we expect the Ghanaian government to suddenly rewrite the agreement because the company makes some successful discoveries. What is also important to note is that Ghana has stronger legislation than Guyana when it comes to governing its petroleum sector. I know that in his 2018 budget presentation, Minister Trotman spoke about plans to revise the 1986 Petroleum Exploration and Production Act and its regulations, as well as the formulation of an oil and gas policy and a local content policy. He also spoke about the need to review our environmental regulations, our health and safety regulations, and the need for petroleum taxation and fiscal legislation, and that government was working on a sovereign wealth fund bill. As I mentioned before, we are new to this industry, and all of us, public and private sector alike, need to get prepared. And this is what we are doing. It cannot be done overnight, and until we have new and updated legislation in place, we will face challenges in the management of this sector. Local content is particularly important, and our government is currently reviewing the second draft of a local content policy framework, which was circulated last year for public consultation. It is my hope that we can create a framework that will help us to maximize the value of oil that is retained in Guyana. We'd like to see local participation when it comes to employment, especially at the higher skill levels. We'd like to see training in areas where Guyana lacks capacity. We'd like to see local ownership of companies providing goods and services to the oil and gas sector. We'd also like to see local equity in oil exploration and production companies. We'd like to see knowledge transferred from foreign to local individuals and entities, including government. We'd like to see the transfer of knowledge, skills, best practices, and technology from the petroleum sector to other sectors of our economy in order to enhance our productivity and to improve national competitiveness. This can all be achieved through a strong local content framework, whether by legislation, regulations, or to be written into petroleum agreements. We will be guided by prevailing best practices and international expertise. The recent developments in Guyana's oil and gas industry signal a new era of economic development, unlike any that we have seen before. This is an opportunity for Guyanese people to benefit in a big way from a national asset that is now about to be monetized. It is important that we understand the situation that we are in. Guyana has a large amount of oil and a small population. We also have gold, diamonds, fresh water, fish, forests, and agricultural land in abundance. By 2030, Guyana is likely to be one of the top 2 oil-producing countries per capita. The same is likely to hold true for our oil revenues. The idea of a sovereign wealth fund, or some fund that is legislated and regulated to ensure that oil revenues are used in a way that brings benefits to Guyanese for generations to come, has been ventilated by many. This is certainly the direction that our government intends to take. Our government believes that it is important to convert Guyana's oil revenues into long-term assets that will benefit the people of our country long after the last drop of oil has been extracted. So in closing, I'd like to urge you to prepare yourselves for new opportunities and not to be distracted by the negativity that is being generated over what is probably the most positive event in our post-independence history. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention.
Our next speaker is the President of the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Deodat Indar. Mr. Indar, since taking the presidency, would have been extremely vocal in a number of areas, but particularly local content. I remember several months ago having some discussions with him, and I've come to realize that the issue of local content and businesses in Guyana benefiting from the oil and gas industry is something that he takes personally and seriously. He would have went on several trips overseas, particularly to Canada, to explore what is going on in Newfoundland and Alberta. And I believe that his presence and input in the industry and ensuring that businesses benefit from the industry must be recognized. Mr. Indar.
We welcome you all here today. Your presence here is a reflection. It's a reflection of the interest generated by the oil and gas sector. With the recent conclusion of GPEX 2018, where we saw Guyana as a display and on display for investment, as an investment destination that is ripe in the Caribbean. as well as Latin and South America. Here we saw companies from all over the world. We saw investors that has never trotted this land before showing up in Guyana. And that tells a story. That says something about where we are as a country, where we are at this juncture. But a lot has been said. A lot has been said over and over. What we have to do as a private sector, as a country, is to look at what has been done. What has been done to shape the sector. A lot of talk, but let's look at the actions. So, we as a private sector, and as leaders in the industry, we have to make sure that we examine the policies. We have to make sure we examine whatever laws are coming to bear, how it's going to shape this industry, and what is the impact of it in the short, medium, and long term. We have to make sure whatever regulation comes after is properly vetted before they take effect. Because laws and regulation, when they are passed, they are very difficult to find themselves being changed for some reason or the next. Now, we have to do this because we want to make sure that Guyana benefits and Guyanese benefit from this natural resource.
I put some comments in front of you for deliberation for the balance of the day. Now, the JCCI has been on the forefront on issues surrounding the oil and gas sector and the wider economy because one goes into the other. As businesses and as citizens of Guyana, in this republic, we all have our own expectations. We all have opinions, and we all have recommendations of what this oil and gas sector should be, how it should be shaped. Now, what we have to do is to channel that in the right direction, in the right manner. Now, as the president of the chamber, I'm also a citizen of this country, and I do have some of my own recommendations and my own comments and criticism of what is going on, but I will leave those comments and criticism for a different forum. Here, I would like to, let's focus a little on what we can get out of it as businesses. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is immigration systems and the free movement of labor. Now, Guyana is a party to the CARICOM Treaty of Chaguaramas. CARICOM member states, we have free movement of labor. But we have to be careful of what are some of the skilled labor we allow in this country. What are some of the systems we have to put in place for workers' permit to make sure that Guyanese people, although we are late on the curve, we have ourselves a fighting chance to be employed in the sector. We also have to look at signing up to the IMO, the International Maritime Organization. The reason why we cannot issue certificates to our crew member, like STCW certificates for them to go on the offshore vessels, is because we are not party to the International IMO body. So therefore, our people have to go to Trinidad and elsewhere to get certified. That is a costly exercise and it's a deterrent. That is why our people are not that much certified. And in this oil and gas business, you have to be certified. We need basic safety training. We need survival training. We need fire response training and systems. We need incident and accident response training. We need people to get involved in OVID membership. I'm sure some of you have never heard of OVID membership. OVID really is what we call Offshore Vessel Inspection Database member. It is offered by our company's International Marine Forum, OCIMF.
These things are offered in the EU bloc, in Canada and elsewhere. But we have to make sure that we have systems here to capture that. Now, we first have to design those systems, have them accredited, and then you launch them through
or via an educational institution. So then you have either be done by the University of Guyana or some private operator. We also have to look to financing of projects. I see some of the bankers are here. Within the oil industry and the spin-off industries. Because if you're going to have those revenues that the minister just talked about, well, then you have to build stuff. If you're going to build stuff, you need steel. If you're going to build stuff, you need concrete. We need a steel factory. We need concrete factories. We have to finance those things. Because if we're going to develop, we have to develop the right way at a cost-effective manner. Also, would like to talk about the human development side of it. Now, regardless of how much money we receive from oil, if we don't put it to good use, it's of no use to us. We need the right people with the right skills. How do you do that? You need to make sure that the University of Guyana have a separate school. Even if it's not the University of Guyana that have that petroleum school, it should be some different operator, private operator that we must have a college that deals with all of the skills, certifying all of the required skills that the offshore industry needs, at least most of them. And then you have the spin-off industries that you need to make sure that those people are certified, right? So training and skill development and human capacity is critical to the development of Guyana. But let's look a little more into other broad areas. You know, the oil and gas development in Guyana is taking a different shape. So we would like to support further exploration and development. But let's do that under the existing blocks for once. They already have a lot of blocks that were issued. I understand that we are looking at having people to look at blocks, the other remaining blocks. Now, new issuance of blocks should be done and should be done carefully. Now, we need to consider Guyana having one or two blocks of its own, as they did in Norway with Statoil in the early days when they found their oil, right? So although we're hearing calls about auctions of blocks, which is a good option, you get the best for the land, the water, sorry, we should be careful if we're going to give out all the blocks we have and leave none for ourselves as a country. So we need to also consider the relinquishment agreements in these PSAs. If you enforce them or you make them a little, or you strengthen them, well then if the operators are not, they're only holding up the areas and they're not actively exploring them, well then they must have some level of relinquishment and you need to recover back those and reuse those to new aspirants. I want to touch on something that I've seen in the news that I believe that we as Guyanese need to just take cognizance of.
You know, I have two little daughters. One is 8 and 1 is 9. It's two rabbits, so obviously. A lot of us in this room have children, or some of us are too young, but we're sure we're going to have families. So we need to cater for the next generation. Now, in 1972, the UN Stockholm Conference on Human Environment
recognized that we have the responsibility to protect and to improve the environment for both the present and the future generations. They coined a term, intergenerational equity. So since 1972, they coined that term. It is in the heart of international law. This was published in the United Nations Press in 1992 by Edith Brown Weiss. Now what this means in the context of Guyana is that we have command over what we do with our resources, but we should not issue them all and deplete our resources in one lifetime. We need to leave some for future generations. So we need to consider that in the deliberation of how we issue our blocks in the future. I would like to also touch on the local content area. It's something that I've been fighting for. Now, I would like to see the local content policy be delivered in public domain so we can have an idea of where we are going as a country. Now, we already know that there's a draft available, but that local content policy, although good and sets out a broad framework, the Chamber of Commerce will be sending a draft legislation to the government, simple draft legislation of local content to the government within this week. We have already at the final stages of sending it. Now, this local content policy is not a Ghanaian-like policy. It's not a Brazilian-like policy. It is a simple policy with enough workarounds. It is simple, and it gives the onus on the operators to make sure that what is in the agreement about first consideration for Guyanese businesses for goods and services is in law. It's standard. It's uniform among all different operators, so it does not changes as you negotiate operator by operator. It's one standard system that everybody need to comply with, and we will be sending that to government, and we hope that we see that be tabled sometime in the near future in Parliament. The subcontractors that we have in the oil operation, that the oil operators give to do the job, we have a lot of them: Noble, Saipem, SBM, You have a whole lot of them, right? That's just 7 or 8 of them so far. You have the shore-based facility in Guyana, you have Tiger Tanks. These subcontractors have a lot of contracts that they have to give out. So they're going to subcontract some of their services and requirement for goods. We as Guyanese, we need to get in the know. We need to know exactly what the entire tree of services and goods that they need. We need to find ourselves a niche to say, okay, I will be able to service this area, or I will be able to provide goods in this area. In doing so, what you don't do as a business is bite off more than you can chew. You want to be expensive and flawless in this business. Make sure that there's no room for error. And you have to make sure that you're best at the game that you're doing. So carve out your niche, make sure that you know what you're doing, get better at what you're doing so you can be competitive. So what you need to do is make sure that you register with a local content center so you understand exactly what is out there and the timeline that is coming out. Because everything have an opening date and a closing date. And if you missed it, you're going to complain. And when you complain, you become bitter. One bitter person shares it to 3 bitter person, then it goes to 9, then it goes to 27. That is how it spreads. So before we go to that, let's get into the know, understand what is out there so we can be able to benefit from it. But apart from that, we want to look at local content in terms of the value of local content. We don't want to say, okay, we have 5 persons going on a boat or 10 persons on one of the vessels, and that is local content. No, we need to look at it in a broader view. Now, cost style. The minister was just talking about cost style. Cost style is that the upper limit of cost style is about 75%. It cannot go above that. So it means that all of the goods and services needs to go in as input to the operation offshore cannot exceed 75%. That means that it will have a lot of value in import of items that they need out there and they need on shore, as well as services. So that's a lot of money. If you calculate the value of that, it's in the billions of dollars. Where we as Guyanese people, to benefit, we have to make sure that we get a part of that. So the cost element is really the operation side of it. And we got to make sure that we benefit from that part of it. How do we benefit? If we can look at, as companies in Guyana, we can look at organic development and we can make sure we get ISO systems, food safety systems, and all the rest of certification that you need. But what you can do to make sure that you speed up the process is partner with people. Find a partner that you know that you can trust and you can build with, and try to make sure that you get faster into the game rather than later, so you can benefit a little from first movers advantage in Guyana. Now, a lot has been talking about oil and gas and so on, but I'm obligated to just make this last comment on the other parts of the economy. We can't drink the oil. We have to eat. So we got to make sure that our other sectors are performing. We can't just have oil and gas as a major part of the economy and the rest is just on the periphery. We got to make sure as a country we develop those other sectors. The agriculture sector needs to be developed, fishery sector, forestry, on all the rest of the sectors. We have to make sure that we keep an eye on those sectors and make them resilient. So when you suffer from oil shocks in terms of the prices on the international market, we make sure that those industries can be able to prop up when they have time of decline. Lastly, I want to consider the foreign exchange that will come into Guyana. Now, we need it, right? So when you grow your competitiveness, you start to export, you're going to get a lot of foreign exchange into Guyana. And that would help to build Guyana brick by brick. So, ladies and gentlemen, I was given 5 to 7 minutes. I would just want to say best of luck to this seminar today. I'm telling you guys to ask whoever is doing the presentation all the hard questions. Those are the best questions. But let's discuss it formally, let's discuss it intelligently, and let's be respectful to each other. I'm hopeful today that the collective wisdom of everybody in this room can come to bear, and we can have some firm recommendations going forward for businesses to make sure that they can get a bite of what's going on. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Indar. In outlining a number of the opportunities that are available, I think it's also important to note that many times as business people, I myself being the owner of a business, when we think about opportunities in the sector, we think about engineering and supplying services to the vessels exploring out there. But there are opportunities for all of us. Noble Oil recently had an advert out in the newspapers where they were looking for services such as painters, restaurant providers, meet and greet. So these very downstream simple services are the kinds of services that many small and medium-sized businesses here in Guyana can definitely benefit from. I'd like to welcome now the IDB country representative in Guyana, Ms. Sophie McKinnon, to deliver her remarks.
While preparing for this brief remarks this weekend, the comments of Guyana becoming one of the major oil producers in the world and the sudden interest on Guyana was the main ideas that come to mind. And going through different notes and articles, I went back to this article that most of you most probably saw in the Financial Times a month ago, the 5th of February, and I'm quoting here, 2018, how Guyana can avoid the curse of oil. And the hottest new prospect for the world's oil industry is Guyana, a small, relatively poor country in the northeastern coast of Latin America, end quote. The article was circulated, most of you must have seen it. It was on social media, and if I'm correct, some of the written media did quote it. And I'd like to bring your attention to this article, not about the angle on the oil companies, all due respect. It's really about what it means for Guyana. And to the risk of sounding a bit redundant from the precedent speakers, because I was not supposed to speak in this order, the article continues to say that it brings both wealth and trouble. And I won't use the word trouble here, but good news, and maybe sometimes less good news, and it depends how you handle it. And I think that's a fact that is in the literature, and it's not about being negative, it's how you handle the situation. So diverse experience of resource-rich countries suggests that natural resources is a mixed blessing. This is not new. This is something that is repeated in the media, here in the literature. Some countries have been successful in transforming such wealth into sustainable economic growth and development, and many others have been, let's say, less successful. Some of them have been less successful at the beginning, and with time did correct and were able to reach better targets. And I think it's common sense for the public and for the citizens of a country to believe that natural resources abundance could positively contribute to economic growth and poverty reduction. There are high expectations from the population in any country when natural resources are extractive natural resources, and it's natural for such discoveries to have such expectations. And if not managed properly, wealth accrued from natural resources are believed to have undesirable effects on resource-rich economies, which have been quoted. And I will not play the role of the bank with the macroeconomic here. I'm here talking to the private sector, and that again is there. But what I'm really trying to say here is that irrespective of how the private sector or the government responds, the discovery of oil in Guyana represents a tectonic shift in this country's fortune. And this, I think we are all clear, and there are no questions about this. Guyana is at a critical juncture for the country and its people. This oil discovery, however it's managed, will inevitably impact the economic development. You have read, you have sat in, this is not the first seminar regarding oil and gas, and I will not go through the different versions of what a government needs to do. I think that has been documented. You know that about the institutions, the legal frameworks, the management of revenue. I think one of the main points that we all agree upon is about how strong institutions are and how they are built. But the focus today here is really about the private sector, and I would say the local private sector. This is the main theme today. So I'm not going to go on to the institutions and go on the public side of what the bank would say. It's exactly how this will play out best for the Guyanese private sector and how they can prepare themselves for this change and take advantage of the opportunities. And this has been said by the 2 or 3 speakers before me. The oil industry can help Guyana promote robust growth in the economy, and their oil revenues can be used to finance priority domestic investment to promote diversified growth. Needed infrastructure development such as roads, bridges, or even social services such as hospitals and schools. And I think we can, there are two folds here. What was mentioned before, really the possibilities about the value chain of oil and gas, and meaning the direct opportunities that have been mentioned. We can talk about them, but I'm sure their speakers will go in detail about them. Given the nature of the oil exploitation in Guyana, being offshore, being deep water, the opportunity are there, but they are most probably not as likely and relatively limited compared to what could happen in other settings. And this is not new information. They are there, but they are limited. In addition, if you look at the current map of goods and services that the Guyanese economy produces, they are limited, the type of services that can really participate fully immediately. And it might be possible to develop local capacity in some of these sectors very quickly. Some of them will take more time to reach the level of quality and quantity required by international oil companies. It's feasible. Some of them are more feasible than others. You have quick wins and you have others that are less quick wins. And that's how institutions like ours can support, looking at which are the ones. And I'm sure there are since the oil exploration is going on, and there are others, that the opportunities, and I think I've heard, are already ongoing. It is how most probably to scale them up or to see what the next steps would be. The sectors that are too complex to develop locally immediately in a short time period, they are also opportunities, but need different type of assistance, and that's where often international companies and corporations can come in collaboration, joint ventures. There are different ways of going about it. I will not talk too long about the local content policies that was talked about. It is one of the ways of supporting priority sectors, but I would say that it has to be designed carefully to ensure that the set requirements correspond to the existing and future local capacity and the petroleum industry cycle also. So there's caution there also, although it is necessary. But I think the place where we all agree is the opportunities around the windfall of oil and gas revenues, and they present more possibilities and a wider range of possibilities. Once again, I will take for granted that the institutions and the management of the revenues are done as per recommendation that the best practices. I'm not going to get, and the different steps that are taken are indicative of that happening. I think that the question that interests this group is, once the revenue comes in, what would a sustainable development policy for Guyana look like? What role would the private sector play in creation and implementation of such a policy? And I think those are the main questions, and your discussions today will most probably be around something of this nature. This development policy, of course, can only be sustained because of the oil revenue. In other words, I'm going to simplify. How do you spend the money that oil will bring? Very, very, very simply, I'm going to simplify. Part of the oil revenue could be used to fund urgent investments, and the ones that I think that are most probably from my few years in Guyana would come to mind are telecommunication, electricity, and transportation. Such investment could boost local production significantly, as we know that reliable supply of electricity generation do have a significant impact, and not always positive on the business sector. Transport costs and connectivity are almost quite high in the Guyanese economy, and there are several opportunities there to upgrade the airports, which is of course ongoing, tourism, agriculture to bolster economic diversification, ports, deepwater ports, improvement links with your and southern neighbors in Brazil are all opportunities that that are extra revenue, and the windfall could position you for that. There's also, I think we need to talk about it a bit, just a few words, the development of a green economy also has exciting opportunities within the policy. All these investments where the private sector provides public goods will require a new type of relationship between the private sector and the public sector, as well as innovative financial instruments. Public-private partnerships may be an attractive option and are most probably ongoing. I think the last point I'd like to bring out is also very important, is the necessity to invest in human capital. The access to the correct educational system in terms of primary, secondary, tertiary university is important, and that's key for the young generation, for the youth of Guyana. But I think they're also training the employees to improve business operations now, not for the next generation immediately. Move from a greater number of unskilled workers to skilled workers, boosting productivity and fostering competitive advantages for the Guyanese companies or companies working here are also necessary to be part of the equation of success. It's not about only the labor market and attracting the type of skills, but also investing to keep your skilled workers and train the new ones to be able to be responsive to the market. So the primary audience for this seminar today is really, I did not go into the macroeconomic as you would expect maybe a bank to do, or looking at institution in the public sector. I think we've talked about it, and we'll most probably have other opportunities. But I do think that today it's really about the Guyanese private sector. It's about to seize the opportunities that are now available and to how to open the new ones which will benefit the country. How the Guyanese private sector can take advantage of the downstream opportunities that lie ahead, and especially the perspective and challenges and opportunities that will come with the foreseen increase of economic activity. I hope this is a very fruitful day for everybody.
Thank you, Ms. Markkanen. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome the Chairman of the Private Sector Commission, Mr. Edward Boyer, for his remarks.
I'd like to welcome you all this morning. I think I look back at my presentation, and what I've been hearing from, starting from Norman this morning, talking about oil and gas, the minister, Sophie, Indar, I think we're on the same periphery, talking about the same thing, right? That this is a new industry. And before I make my presentation, I want to say we're all saying the same thing in a different way. I'd like to compliment the fact that a lot of issues are going to be raised here for the local private sector that probably would not have raised at GIPEX, because GIPEX focused on an international forum. As an international forum, they did have some local private sector participation, but it created an international flavor and doing business in Guyana. And I think this here, coming soon after GIPEX, a lot of persons criticized the fact that it was too early. But we have to keep stressing to our local private sector what's before us. And this is not the last, this is not going to be, there are going to be other types of forums, seminars, and we should all participate, because you go away with something that would help you develop your business or understand this sector more and more. Let me just read what I have here and hope that the participants this morning could understand why we have, or why we decided on this oil and gas seminar, and the entitlement of it is perspectives for the local private sector. A lot has been already said about the oil and gas sector. There have been pros and cons. To suffice to say that are mammoth opportunities for this industry, for Guyanese as a whole. Our duty as the embodiment of the private sector is to ensure that our members are aware of these opportunities. In all of this, there are entrepreneurial skills that need to be revised and addressed. While we are accustomed to doing business in a singular manner, an industry as large as oil and gas and as diverse as oil and gas would require retooling of our energies. We need to learn from countries that have been exposed to oil and gas and understand that there is a need for acquiring the expertise required to be competitive and successful. I think we refer to the fact that we are going to be competitive in bids for what we can offer services here. There's a local content policy, and we need to make as much use of this as possible. We can enter into partnerships, collaborate in different skill sets, get up to speed with the skill sets that may be lacking, and all in all, be the entrepreneurs that we can be. We'll have concerns that the oil and gas operations is capital intensive, and individually, most of us cannot afford this. However, collectively and through joint ventures with local and international companies, we can benefit tremendously. We need to master the technologies and understand that if we are going to succeed, we must open our vision and grasp at the numerous opportunities which are available. Our objective in convening this seminar is to bring as many of the players in the sector together as possible. And we have successfully achieved this goal. As I look around, I see the room full. To tell you the truth, the seminar was just organized within a week. And, you know, when you look at where we were, to bring all the players in the room within that short time was an impossibility, but we've done it. And there's even more persons out there who are asking us to make sure that they have participation whenever we have our next conference or seminar. I hope that by the end of today, that we'll all walk away with a better understanding of how as Guyanese we can succeed. The local content policy, which we have heard so much about this morning, must be beneficial to both parties, the suppliers of goods and services, the recipients of goods and services. There must be trust and mentoring of business in this new industry. While we represent the private sector, we cannot work alone. We need to work hand in hand with government to ensure that opportunities for fair competition is made possible. The question on hand for both parties is, how important is this industry to us all? If the answer is that it's very important, then success will be gained by collaboration between business and government. Government should be congratulated for establishing a Department of Energy directly responsible for oil and gas, as this sector needs to be effectively managed and regulated by the government. Entrepreneurs must understand that there is no substitute for what is required. We must develop the skill to understand what is required and adopt best practices. There will be competition from our neighbors who are oil and gas producers. And we are aware of this competition at our doorstep. However, I'm sure that given the expertise and knowledge available to us, we will enjoy the fruits of this new world. Given the little time that we have, we need to learn as much as we can about this industry in order to keep our engine of growth purring. You know, we always talk about the engine of growth. I think we got to keep this on the up and up. As a caution though, it's gone again, I think, anyway. As a caution, we should not invest blindly because of promises of prosperity, but exercise diligence and assess the investment risk. Very important. People must not invest on a basis that they think that it will pay off, but rather weigh the risk. As it relates to our seminar today, we are bringing to the floor expertise in the industry, managers, operators in the industry, along with regulators, to give you a fair experience and expectation of what you should leave here with. They will say where we are currently and where we will be in a number of years. I think we've heard some of that this morning. I do believe that we need to start from scratch. I think we've started already. There are many sources of expertise out there, and just as we invest to expand our businesses, we need to become more informed of this industry. We have to get critical information so that we can make better business decisions. This seminar brings the experience of an oil and gas expert, Mr. Tamandi, a consultant from Canadian Executive Service Organization, which is known as KESO, with worldwide experience. Mr. Tamandi, CV has shown his knowledge of working with the private sector oil and gas companies. Together with presentations from ExxonMobil and the Center for Local Business and Development, will be informed of current operation development and plans for Guyana. To complement these presentations, the Ministry of Natural Resources has agreed to make a presentation entitled, and I was very impressed with this, Opportunities for the Private Sector. Role of the private sector in securing, maximizing local content. And I thought that was very fitting on the framework of the oil and gas industry in Guyana. We'll have discussions, as Indara indicated, amongst local private sector associations who will give their perspective and voice their concerns. I trust there will be questions and answers. I know that given the time limit, we would try to make sure that all your questions are answered. I trust we'll be all, leave here with a lot of benefits. And I see this industry as something very new to us, but Guyanese has always been the will and the way. And we're going to make sure that the Dutch disease and the curse of oil don't enter into our country. Thank you.
The oil and gas industry is dominated predominantly by men. And an interesting thing that I found happening here in Guyana is that many of the smaller companies now trying to get into the industry have many women in them, particularly companies providing manpower services to several of the vessels operating offshore. And our next speaker is one such person operating at the level of ExxonMobil Guyana. Maybe would have set an example for the other, many other women in the industry. I think coming just a day or two before International Women's Day, that is notable, so I wanted to ensure that we do that. And I would therefore like to welcome Ms. Kimberly Brasington, Senior Director, Public and Government Affairs, ExxonMobil Guyana.
What I'd like to do today is talk through some of the numbers. I think I can add a little bit of value in the discussion and setting the scene. There's a lot of numbers out there, so I just have a few slides to help me do that. And then what I'll do is commit to you to stay around for the whole day. And I brought with me Mr. Peter Dillon. He is ExxonMobil's commercial manager here in Guyana now full-time. And so we'll stay around, and we're happy to be a part of the conversation all day and answer questions and be a part of the constructive conversation that the private sector is hoping to facilitate today. So, all right, what is ExxonMobil in Guyana? Who are we and what do we look like? We are Esso Exploration and Production Guyana Limited. That is the name of our affiliate. But for shorthand, we just say ExxonMobil Guyana. It's the same thing. EEPGL is our affiliate here in Guyana. And then to the rest of the world, it's ExxonMobil. But I notice fondly in Guyana, it's ExxonMobil. But we do say ExxonMobil. But it's okay, it's growing on me. The ExxonMobil is growing on me. So let's talk about the numbers. I'm just gonna start with exploration. So you hear a lot of talk about 7 discoveries, but we've actually drilled 11 wells. So when I say a discovery, I'm actually referring to a standalone field. So ExxonMobil has discovered 7 standalone reservoirs, 7 fields of oil. So that's Liza Deep, Snook, Turbo, Payara, Ranger, and most recently Pecora, which on this map, Pecora isn't changed to a discovery yet. Those are 7 standalone fields, but we've drilled several wells in the Liza field. We've drilled Liza 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those extra wells that we've drilled all in the Liza field are called appraisal wells sometimes, and they help us get more data on that particular field as we're going forward considering developing it. And then we did a second well on Payara for the same reason, to help us understand the size of that particular field. So that's how you get to the 11, and then the one we don't talk about is Skipjack. Skipjack was our second well, our second field we went out to try and hopefully discover hydrocarbon. It looked identical to Liza on the seismic data that we had, and our geologists were certain it was going to be a lookalike, and it was dry. No hydrocarbon to speak of. And so we learned from that, and we've gone forward, and we have had future successes. So that is how the 11 wells break down, and there are 7 discoveries. So that's the numbers. Then you hear all kinds of estimates about, so how much oil is there? So ExxonMobil has said publicly 3.2 billion equivalent, barrels of oil equivalent barrels of recoverable resource, 3.2 billion barrels. And so that does not include Ranger or Pecora, the last 2 discoveries that we've made. We don't have enough data yet. We haven't come out publicly to say how big we think the last 2 are. So the 3.2 billion includes Liza, Liza Deep, Payara, Snook, and Turbo. And so then the latest number that we threw out there was this 500,000 barrels a day that was going to be produced by, say, 2025. And so the way we get that number is, look at the Liza field. We have said publicly that we're going to develop half of the Liza field. And now, most recently, the second half. So the Liza field is large enough that it'll take us 2 FPSOs offshore. The first one, Liza Phase 1, will produce about half the hydrocarbon in the Liza field. And then Liza Phase 2, which we're currently in the process of going through the environmental permit for and putting together the development plan for, would produce the second half of the Liza field, right? And then Payara and Pecora are 4 miles from each other. They're very close to each other, but they are together. We're considering developing those with a 3rd FPSO. So you have 3 FPSOs floating offshore, developing just the Liza field, Payara field, and Pecora. And those 3 together, that's how you get to that 500,000 barrels a day. We've said Liza Phase 1 will produce about 120,000 barrels a day. Liza Phase 2, 220,000 barrels per day. And then the remainder to get us to 500 is Payara and Pecora together. So there's the numbers. And then exploration is ongoing. So we are about to bring in a second drill ship. And this second drill ship actually marks the start of development. The second drill ship will be here to drill the development wells that will ultimately be the producing wells from the Liza field. And then some of them will be the re-injection. We'll re-inject the associated gas and re-inject water to help keep the pressure of the reservoir up. But that second rig, we're going to bring it in, and we're going to use it to drill 1 exploration well first, to just get used to the rig and get it going. And while we are going to continue our exploration program with the Stena Karen, which is our current rig we've been using for the past year and a half. And then production. So production starts 2020. By 2020, we'll be producing oil from the Liza reservoir. And then Phase 2 is estimated to start by 2022. And then Payara, you could assume, a few years after that. So you're starting to see a real industry. For the first couple of years I was here, I always had to say, it's not an industry yet. It's potentially 1 field. It's one discovery. But in the last year, since the granting of our final investment decision and our production license, it's real. It's a real industry, and we're going forward with production. And I make that point because Guyana is unique in that sense, and that we have an active exploration campaign going on to continue to look for other resources. We have a very active development campaign going on where we're starting to develop the Liza field. And then we're soon to be also a producing country where we're going to be producing hydrocarbons. So we have the whole spectrum of an upstream operation here, which is not insignificant. All right, there's the numbers. So next, I'm going to talk about some more numbers because I know this is really important and personal to everybody in this room, including me. Let's talk a little bit about local content because local content is important and it is critical to our success here is that we get the right level of local content. We have a lot of experience operating around the world, and our most successful operations are the ones in which local content plays an active and large role. You have buy-in, it's more affordable, and then you have staying power. The industry is a very long-term industry. We're here for decades. So like it or not, we're here to stay. We are your partner for growth for the long term. We want to be. And so that's 30, 40 years. Some countries we've been 100 years, like Indonesia and the United States. So a couple of the numbers. All right. So we have 605 Guyanese businesses have registered in our supplier database. It's 600 companies who've expressed interest in wanting to be a part of the supply chain. We have 70 of those businesses who are taking courses right now. When I say courses, those are not just couple-hour courses. These are 3 to 6 month courses to build their capacity in things like procurement and safety. And you're going to hear a little bit more about that this afternoon from the speaker from the Center for Local Business Development. Last year in 2017, ExxonMobil and our contractors provided 30,000 hours of training and capacity building to Guyanese, all in support of this industry and to support our projects. ExxonMobil's office here is relatively small, and I have to make this point because an offshore deep water operation isn't very manpower intensive. It doesn't require a lot of people to run a deep water offshore operation. We have 37 employees. Actually, this was last week. We've just hired 3 more local Guyanese employees. But at the time I put this together, 37 employees, 70% of those are Guyanese. 3 of them are in management positions already. And then the number grows exponentially when you look at all of the people who are working full-time to support our project. So our contractors, 458 was the number at the year end last year, 48% of those Guyanese. And I pulled out the Guyana shore base as an example. They have 56 direct employees and 97% of them are Guyanese. So some really solid examples of, in very early days, real local content, real Guyanese individuals, people, businesses involved in the project. If you think about May 2015, that's not quite 3 years ago. That was when we found that first discovery. Then it took us an entire year to come back really and drill the second well. Everybody was trying to get their head around the fact that we had discovered hydrocarbons. So it's been 3 years, but really 2 years, in all honesty, that we have been going full force ahead. And I mean, when we talk internally about this, people are very proud and impressed with the ability of the Guyanese people and as a country to stand up and get involved and be willing and ready to work hard and learn more and be a part of this. So yes, we need to do more, and yes, everybody in this room agrees to that, but I do think you should take a little bit of pride in how far we've come so quickly. One last stat, we used 309 Guyanese-owned suppliers, and that's not just companies who are registered in Guyana. Those are Guyanese-owned suppliers, and in 2017 spent US $24 million with those businesses. That's direct investment into this country and economy and Guyanese suppliers. The last statistic is, as of last week, the project has hired 80 Guyanese. 79 of them men, and our first female last week to go work offshore. This is to support our exploration and drilling operations to date. And our subcontractor, Technique FMC, who's responsible for the kit that sits on the ocean floor, has hired 10 Guyanese out of UG, and they're currently in a training program in Brazil. They're going to be training up until 2020 or 2019 to come back and work and support the project. Very high-tech work. And then ExxonMobil has hired 5 Guyanese, 2 to work in our offices in Houston, and 3 that we are sending to our ExxonMobil offshore operations in Gulf of Mexico to start getting experience so they can come back and work on the FPSO here for ExxonMobil as Guyanese. And so I know the numbers aren't huge, but the numbers aren't huge in an offshore deep water operation. It only takes about 120 people to run that vessel. But we are committed to involving the right level of Guyanese and growing with you. And the last point on this page I want to make is about revenue. And others today have touched on it, but local content is absolutely a way that this industry will touch the country. Yes, many of you will work for, around, or have contracts or supplies, and that's important, but most won't, to be honest. And that's okay too, because we do need to diversify and we do need to support the rest of the country and the growth in the economy. But Sophie, I know, touched on it, and people who've talked to me, I know I'm passionate about this topic, is revenue management, because the revenue is going to start coming to the country in 2020. The very first day that oil starts flowing and the very first tanker that's sold, the country sees revenue. And that is the most impactful way that ExxonMobil being in this country will impact Guyanese, is how the revenue is managed and how it's spent. What is the plan for that? And how does that then effectively change the lives of Guyanese people? ExxonMobil is here as your partner. And we're going to be here for the long term to build capacity and get that oil out of the ground and do it safely and efficiently. But we don't have a say in how the revenue is spent. But we want to be a part of that conversation. We've done this around the world. We've seen things that work and don't work. But that's where you all are empowered and have a voice in that conversation. All right, I'll get off my soapbox. I know, those of you who know, I can go on and on. All right, so before I give up the microphone, my next slide is, I couldn't not talk about the contract. And so, as you know, we released the contract in December. We believe in transparency. There are 50 countries around the world where we operate where our contracts are in the public domain. It's something that we support for constructive conversation, right? And this contract is what's going to hold us, ExxonMobil, accountable to you, the country, and vice versa, and that we do this in the way we say and set out to do this, and do this meaning develop a hydrocarbon. So you're not going to be able to necessarily read these, but this was the start of a campaign where we were just trying to get facts out. So I'm just going to call out to you some of the points on this, and we've become more vocal and active on our Facebook page and trying to engage and have a dialogue and get people talking. Like Minister Gaskin said, let's have a healthy conversation. Let's not everybody be positive. You need the healthy dialogue and back and forth and conversation. So we want to do that, and we want to empower the people who want to be a part of that with information. So there is an independent oil and gas consulting and research company called Wood Mackenzie. And they went out and they did a study on frontier countries and contracts in them in 2017. And they assessed in their database of countries, there were over 100 contracts, Guyana's contract. And they have come out and publicly said that Guyana's petroleum agreement with ExxonMobil falls in the middle of their spectrum of contracts for frontier countries. So very similar to what Minister Gaskin says, if you put that in the middle, yes, there might be some, there's going to be half that have terms better, and there are going to be half that have terms that are less favorable than Guyana. And so you're right, everybody's welcome to their assessment and opinion of the contract. That's fair game, and that's healthy. But there is an independent consulting firm who's looked at it and said, look, it falls in the middle. And then I think, too, Minister Gaskin made a point we don't talk about very often that is worth talking about, is that ExxonMobil and the government of Guyana signed the contract in 1999. The contract was still valid in 2016. It didn't need to be renegotiated. And in actuality, it wasn't a renegotiation. It was an opportunity where the government said, we have a model agreement, a 2012 model agreement that all of our other blocks adhere to. We'd like to modernize yours, opportunity to bring you up to speed. And then it was an opportunity for ExxonMobil to have more time to explore. And so the 2016 agreement allowed ExxonMobil more time for exploration. Now the contract, we could still be doing what we're doing now, nothing would have changed, but it gives us more time to look further and take our time and study the seismic and be thoughtful as we choose our prospects to drill, so we don't have more skipjacks that find no hydrocarbon. And so when we sat down to update the contract, the government did secure a lot of other benefits that were not in the 1999 agreement, such as the 2% royalty and the signing bonus and an increased rental fee, the lease, the money we pay to rent the block every year. They secured a community relations fee that didn't exist before. They increased the training fee. So lots of incremental positive changes for the people. And so if my last slide, it talks about the difference in a production sharing agreement and a taxes and royalty regime agreement. And Minister Gaskin did touch on this too, in that there are different types of agreements around the world used in different countries based on what's right for that particular country. Guyana uses a production sharing agreement in that Guyana gets the majority of the benefit, the majority of the revenue based on the sale of petroleum. We share the petroleum. We sell it and we share it. And in this case, it's 50-50. And on top of that, Guyana has a 2% royalty. So 2% royalty and then split 50-50. In the countries where you have a royalty and tax regime, the country doesn't get any of the profit from selling the oil. The contractor sells all the oil and then pays the government a tax on that oil. And that's how they gain the revenue. And usually there's a higher royalty in that case for stability. And so it's a royalty and taxes regime, and that's how so lots of different factors go into it, which is one of the main reasons I brought Peter with me today, is because that's what he does for a living. He's a commercial expert and has worked for ExxonMobil for many years. And so I've been in his office almost every day over the last couple of weeks trying to get my head around it and understand it so I can help talk about it more intelligently with people. But I do think it's important because a lot of the comparisons we're seeing aren't apples for apples. They're unique aspects of a contract out of context. Don't give you the whole picture. So when I sit back and look at it, I thought those were important messages to get across. And then I think I might not give up the mic without mentioning a controversial, tidbit that I keep hearing about is this $460 million that is an exploration fee that's in this new 2016 agreement. And so a little clarity on that is that the $460 million is an actual cost that was incurred by ExxonMobil and partners from 1999 to 2016. And per that 1999 agreement, costs are recoverable. And so that cost gets wrapped into all the costs incurred to date, and we've estimated the $4.4 billion publicly in order to develop this Liza Phase 1 field. And so the $460 million it gets carried over. Because we updated the contract in 2016 doesn't mean the costs incurred to date go away. The costs were still incurred. The Liza Phase 1, that $460 million includes drilling Liza 1, and Liza 2. And so those costs then get recovered when we start producing oil per the contract. It's not an extra fee, or it's not a random number. They're actual numbers, added up and submitted, and will get factored into the cost. So that brings me to the end of my prepared remarks. But like I say, I will be around for questions. My intent today was just to lay the groundwork, to get the numbers out and give you an idea of what we're doing, and try to hit some of the elephants in the room up front. And I welcome very much the conversation. Thanks to the Private Sector Commission for setting this up, and look forward to a really constructive day.
Thank you, Ms. Brisington. Ms. Brisington touched on a number of things that I know are important to many of us, particularly us Guyanese: the contract, local content, the revenue that will be generated. And I think that we have a legitimate reason to be concerned as Guyanese, or any country that any industry is operating in. But I hold the view that we can be concerned and have legitimate reasons to question things, but simultaneously at the same time we can be excited and optimistic. And I believe that if we're optimistic and we look forward, we will see that there are a number of opportunities. At the beginning, I mentioned a Trinidadian official who I was looking at on television just yesterday morning. And I looked up a few seconds ago and I saw that the Trinidadian official is sitting here with us right now. And many persons around the world recognize the opportunities that exist here. And sometimes it comes across as if they recognize it more than we do. And I think that if we look once more as Guyanese, we will see that there is much more to gain than to lose. We'll now have a 15-minute period for questions and answer, particularly as it relates to Ms. Brisington's presentation and any other questions I suspect that you may have. So the floor is now open to you.
Hi, good morning everyone. My name is Marcel Thomas, and I'm from the Star News. Directly for Ms. Brisington. You said that you're just touching on the contract, but I think key question everyone would want to know is ExxonMobil open to any renegotiation of this contract? We've already had government's position. We want to hear from you now.
Very fair question, and Marcel got my name right. So because of that, I am going to answer your question. I have to be honest and candid with you, and those of you who know me know that's how I am, for better or for worse. In ExxonMobil and in the industry, and honestly, in any industry, the sanctity of a contract is very important, especially in a new industry, in a country that is new to this industry and the foreign investment that it's attracting right now. So while I'm not going to answer your question and say no or yes or never say never, I am going to say we believe firmly in that principle, that there is real value in the sanctity of a contract. And there are a lot of eyes on Guyana right now watching to see how this plays out. And is this a stable environment in which to do business? And so we are committed, though, to being a good partner, and we want to be your partner for decades. And so with that comes conversation and dialogue. And are things going to stay the same today as they are going to be 40 years from now and 50 years from now? I don't know. But I think I'd like to find out, and I think it's a dialogue and a conversation that we should continue. I'm not opposed to the calls for renegotiation. I'm not opposed to the calls for people standing up for what they believe in. But right now, ExxonMobil has a contract with this government, and we intend to stick to it. We're going to hold up our side of that, and we're going to deliver everything under it, and I do hope the government does the same.
Could you explain a little bit further the 50% profit that Guyanese will be entitled to? For example, if oil sells for $60 per barrel, how much of that $60 is our 50%?
So the way the petroleum agreement is structured is that, I think the best way to give an example would be, we take a crude tanker, and the crude tanker will pull up to the FPSO and offload. And a crude tanker will hold about 1 million barrels, right? So about every 7 days, a crude tanker will pull up and offload this 1 million barrels. And we will market that crude on the open market, highest bidder, and we'll sell it. When we sell it, then literally we take the profit from that sale and split it down the middle, 50-50. Now, in actuality, Peter's probably looking at me, because actually we don't split the tankers. The first tanker will go to ExxonMobil, second tanker will go to our partner Hess, third tanker will go to the government. But if you think about it though, 50-50, you sell that oil, 50% goes to the government, 50% goes to ExxonMobil. Now, it depends on the price of crude that day, and the spot market is a spot market. You are selling it that day. The tanker fills up, you sell it for the price of crude. So if the price of crude is $72, you split it 50-50. If the price of crude is $30, which it was just a couple years ago, you split that 50-50. So it is completely contingent on the price of crude oil that you are selling. It's a commodity that we're producing and we're selling it, and then we're going to split it 50-50.
Prime News, Mr. Bracington, you like me would have heard that this is the worst oil contract that we've had. I've seen it written perhaps up a few years ago. I've also learned that ExxonMobil wasn't prepared to have this contract based on the fact that you had an existing 2012 contract, and that you allowed the modification because you had nothing to lose. In your view, do you think Guyana got a fair deal as a result of this contract?
Just a clarification, we had a 1999 contract. There was never a 2012 contract. The 2012 number comes in with the government's model, PSC. And the model, production sharing contract, was on the GGM website, and that's the model which all of the other contracts are following as they're being released. You're seeing that. And so in 2016, it wasn't that ExxonMobil didn't have anything to lose. You know, ExxonMobil did have something to gain in going from our 1999 contract to the updated 2020 model, in that we were able to secure more time to explore, so we could do it in a more thoughtful, measured manner. And in return for that, in any negotiation, the government was able to procure more out of the deal as well, in the 2% royalty, which none of the other contracts that have been released to date have, and the signing bonus and the higher payments that we talked about. And so both parties got something out of it. And we could have stayed with the 1999 agreement. It was valid, and we would be fine. We'd be no different than we are right now today, except the contract released in the public wouldn't have been as good. And so, you know, I feel like we're in a good place right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I reside in that gray zone that is neither the media nor entirely out of the media. I'm a newspaper columnist. This seminar was promoted essentially as one to deal with the local context. Much time has been spent on the contract, largely defending the contract. And I think in the process, a number of misrepresentations have been made. For example, the origin of this new contract. I have written on a number of occasions where it was at a technical meeting in Texas that the representatives from ExxonMobil confronted a technical team from the GGMC requesting a new contract and a new license. I'm not making any criticism of any individual. I'm making some statements that are on the public record. So that's in terms of the origin of that contract. And we all know about the force majeure, the amendment in 2000 2008, we know that the contract would have come to an end based on the fact of the Exploration and Production Act that we have. So I think there has been some misrepresentation. Is it not true that ExxonMobil raised with a technical team from the GGMC the question of a new contract, and this was a completely new contract. There's also the representative from ExxonMobil mentioned it's Exxon. No, it is not. And there is a case decided in the courts in the UK only last year that clearly distinguish between the parent company of an international oil company and any subsidiary in any other country. I'm making this because I think it's important that we understand the context. We will get back to local context, and I'm sure we will all benefit from this. But it's important we put these statements into fact. The question of the stability clause. Any member of the head table aware of the case in Israel where a 10-year stability clause was ruled as unconstitutional by the Israeli court, despite the presence and the argument by Prime Minister Netanyahu that security considerations required such a clause.
Mr. Ram is accurate in his comment about force majeure. So in about 2008, I don't know the exact year, but you're right. The 1999 exploration agreement was put on hold, right? We filed force majeure because of activities going on. Actually, it was Suriname. There was Suriname border dispute at the time. And so, yes, there was a hold put on for a few years where we were unable to do exploration activities, which then extended the life of the contract. With regard to the renegotiation, I can't really, I mean, Peter's looking at me saying no, it's not accurate. I do know that Minister Trotman's gone on record saying publicly, I cannot speak for him, but I've seen him quoted saying that the government initiated the conversation for the renegotiation. But regardless, it doesn't really matter who negotiates or who initiates the conversation. Both parties agreed to have a conversation about it. At the end of the day, if both didn't agree, they wouldn't have been at the table having a conversation. So I can't with all certainty say who asked who first and at what level or where those conversations started, but it did result in a slight renegotiation, updated contract.
Stability clauses are a very common feature of the oil and gas industry. You know, if you go into the consultant Woodmac, they've got a wonderful global fiscal systems database. If you look inside that database, your membership, and you read it, you see about half of the contracts in there have got some form of stability. And so, when you're putting billions of dollars, particularly into a frontier country, you just want to have certainty that the terms of the deal aren't going to change 5 years or 10 years down the line. The countries where we don't have stability clauses, we often think twice about entering into investments in those countries. We have ultimate stability to put an extra $5 billion into the Permian Basin of the USA, for example. We've got high certainty that the terms of those deals won't change. And so we request these clauses. In fact, this one wasn't requested by us. It was put into the Model 2012 agreement, and it was on the table when we received the document. And it looked like a very normal oil and gas sector clause to us. So we were quite happy to agree to it as the kind of stability that we like to see. Now, under that clause, what you're seeing is a rapid pace of development. Because we're comfortable with the government standing behind the stability provisions of the agreement, things like Minister Gaskin said earlier today, we are on this very fast-paced development of putting the $4 billion into Lisa Phase 1 and on an accelerated timeline, Phase 2, maybe, we're talking about the third boat, swiftly thereafter. If there was concerns about stability and are the deals going to change, that level of high pace likely would not exist right now in Guyana. So it's a trade-off. It was in the contract when we received it. We were not surprised by it. It's very normal. Israel may have had a court case that I don't follow the Israeli system. Their courts may have ruled against the clause. The rest, many countries in the oil and gas sector don't, and they prevail in many PSC jurisdictions. Not so much tax royalty, but in PSCs. So it doesn't directly answer the question, but we see them all the time and we find them very normal. There's a form of stability in the Ghana agreement too.